Hello everyone. Welcome to Apex One Radio, Radio Jagran. We are in the studio and will be live soon. Stay tuned in.
Namaste. Namaste refers to a symbolic greeting meaning I respect to the divine in you. So namaste to all our listeners and viewers. We respect the divine in you. My name is Ravi.
Hello everyone. I'm Sudarshan.
This is Apex One Radio. Today is February 16th of 2020 and it is 6 p.m. in our studio. Therefore, we are live again to bring you fifth episode of Radio Jagran, the voice of New American. We started this program on January 12th of this year with the aim of bringing information concerning the New American community every Sunday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. In the last episode, we discussed about mental health and mental illness. We covered up some myths and facts about mental illness. In continuation of our last program, today we will try to address signs and symptoms of mental illness. Also, we will focus on stigma of mental illness in our society. Sudarshan Dai, how shall we move on with this topic for discussion today?
Well, as you said, we are continuing on the discussion about mental illness and mental health challenges across the community. This is not just New American, but across the community, this health problem has been a major issue, and we are breaking down some of the concepts and barriers, right? Rather, I would say a barrier that is lingering in our communities and be able to understand mental health in a very simplistic and everyday language. In doing so, today we will be talking about, in the first half, we'll be talking about how to recognize signs and symptoms of mental illness. And on the second half, let's put it that way, we will talk about how to tackle stigma, overcome taboos, and so on and so forth. So stay tuned in. We want to make this interactive. You'll be able to understand because we'll talk in a very everyday language. And make it simple for you to digest. But please feel free to leave your feedback and suggestions.
Thank you. It is evident that prevalence of mental health in our community is higher than global figures. There are several reasons behind the higher frequency of mental illness in our community. Among several, anxiety, depression, and psychological distress are majorly seen. There are several myths regarding these issues in the community. However, one thing to be clearly understood is that mental illness is a curable disease, so please talk about it. If you have any queries, information, or suggestion about mental health issue, please leave the message in our Facebook live comment section. We will try to address it. Today, we are talking about how to recognize mental illness, as Sudarshan Dai already said, and how to tackle with the stigma. But before starting to discuss on the topic, we'd like to take a short musical break. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This is Ravi and Sudarshan from Radio Jagran, the voice of New Americans. Welcome back after this short musical break. You are listening to fifth episode of Radio Jagaran, the voice of New Americans. Sudarshan Dai and I are addressing the sign and symptoms of mental illness today. In medical field, almost every disease has sign and symptoms. Our body is so radically built that whenever it is going to have any sort of disease, say as simple as seasonal flu or as complex as diabetes or tuberculosis or even more complex disease, our body wants you saying, hey, I'm going to suffer from this disease. Please take care of me before something serious happens. The body shows signs and symptoms for almost every disease. It is the time when you or your near ones need to understand that the treatment is the only choice. There is a narrow difference between a sign and a symptoms. According to Nature Journal, symptoms is something that only a patient can experience. For example, having a back pain or headache or a stomach ache, whereas sign is an evidence of a disease that can be observed by others. For example, skin rash or cough or lump. There are some of the diseases that do not provide symptoms initially, such as HIV or hepatitis or papillomavirus or herpes. However, most of the mental illness provide sign and symptoms. Sudarshan Dai, how easy or how difficult it is to understand about the sign and symptoms of mental illness?
Well, you gave an amazing background, just to understand what signs and symptoms are. And also, the viewers and audiences got the idea that there are signs and symptoms, but they differ from diseases to diseases, right? In that respect, mental health do have signs and symptoms. However, what differs is it has very specific signs and symptoms, and oftentimes we have to be culturally aware. We have to be sensitive enough to understand signs and symptoms. The signs and symptoms are there, right? They always say something to you. They are talking to you in some respect. However, what is needed is the cultural understanding of sign and symptoms, because mental health is when I'm saying mental health and culture, I'm not trying to mix these two things together. But the point is, mental health is very ingrained to our culture. And we see from the cultural lenses, meaning we see through language, we see through the custom and practices. So that is why we have to be adaptive. We have to be open to understand mental health from the cultural lens that we live. But once we adopt it, once we are open-minded, once we want to know more about mental illness, mental health challenges, signs and symptoms, it is rather easy to understand, right? Once we are open-minded.
Right.
But if we keep playing with the taboos, which will come later on, or if we keep playing with the stigmas, then we won't be able to understand. That's why today we wrap up these two topics that interlap with each other. We will be able to understand signs and symptoms. However, at the same time, we need to see what are the taboos, what are the stigmas. And once we sort of break that barrier, the barrier that is created because of the stigma, because of the taboos, we would be very clearly see these are the signs and these are the symptoms. So we'll go into it.
So you mean like whenever you have an education and whenever you can take out those taboo out, even the general people or the general members of the community can understand about the sign and symptoms, right?
Yes, that's correct. Even an everyday person can understand signs and symptoms of mental illness. Given, as you said, given you remove yourself from taboos and stigmas.
Yeah, so, but the other questions that usually comes in the mind when you talk about the sign and symptoms of the mental illness is why it is important to recognize the sign and symptoms. It is quite clear that if we cannot recognize the mental disorders in family members of community members, it leads to the negative consequences for the persons affected and for their families also. But the true question is, who can identify the sign and symptoms of mental illness? That's what I initially told previously. Any members of the society, can any members of the community can identify the sign and symptoms? Can you identify the sign and symptoms? Can I identify the sign and symptoms? Right? Can my friend or my families can identify the sign and symptoms?
Yes, that is the crux of the matter. Can anyone? The misconception is that everybody will not be able to understand signs and symptoms of
Right.
mental illness.
Right.
That's why we keep pushing this topic towards the other end.
Right.
However, the fact is that if you have a basic training, if you do a little bit of research, you would start understanding signs and symptoms. Oftentimes we highly encourage folks who are interested to understand mental illness, mental health challenges, to come attend the mental health first aid training. That 8-hour training actually provides enough of the knowledge and reference to understand the signs and symptoms of the mental illness. But one thing here I want to make a distinction, and I had got some feedback from the last shows, is that although as an everyday person, if you are not trained to make diagnosis, you won't be able to make diagnosis. Okay, so making a diagnosis is someone's job who is an expert in that field. Could be a psychiatric doctor, could be someone who is an expert in that field. Only they can do the diagnosis. But the point
Right.
is that if I or you want to understand mental health signs and symptoms,
Right.
yes, we can. And this is also an attempt today. We wanted to teach you a little
Right.
bit of it,
Right.
that how to recognize signs and symptoms. However, if you are interested to learn more about mental illness, mental health challenges, we really encourage you to take part in the mental health first aid training.
Right. So with that said, we can help you provide. We can help you in conjunction with the mental health first aid provider. But over here, usually our preconceived notion is that only the doctors or the general physicians would be able to identify the sign and symptoms. But our clear-cut message is that whether it's you or whether it's me, whether it's a general member of a community, can identify the sign and symptoms. It's just that we need a little bit knowledge about it and we need to talk about it. But many times we are unable to recognize the sign and symptoms even in our family members or friends or in colleagues. I personally believe that there are some of the knowledge that's lacking on understanding the sign and symptoms. Usually the knowledge in the health and the social care. Why I'm saying is, if we, Sudasadai and me, both came from a very other part of the world, in which the system of the education is something that they usually try to describe. Whenever we learn in the science book, they usually describe the different disease of gastrointestinal system or some other muscular system or the bone system, but I could not find much in details about the disease that's related to mental health.
Right. So that's what we need to talk about, right?
Right.
That's what we need to talk about.
Right.
We went to school, we went to college, right?
Right.
And we spend enormous amount of our, growing up and getting education, but we never get a chance to learn about mental health.
That's
right?
true.
This has been sort of a taboo. This was never brought into mainstream education for a long time.
Right.
And as you said very clearly that,
Right.
we always give this responsibility to mental health care providers to know the signs and symptoms. We never took ourselves that responsibility. Hey, I may have to know the signs and symptoms of mental illness.
Right.
And this is now the time has come. Every single person need to know the basic 101 that I'm talking about.
Right.
101 signs and symptoms of mental illness. Okay.
Right.
And this is one of the ways. There are many ways we'll talk about it, but this is one of the way to know about mental illness. And basic, we are saying basic 101.
Right.
That's what we'll talk today?
Yeah. So why I'm saying this is I went to the medical school and I have been associated with the hospital work. It's already been like 20 years I have been associated with hospital. And I clearly remember when I was doing my intermediate levels in medical lab technology, we used to have that topic of the first aid, in which you have to learn about the every first aid. What happens if you are wounded? What would be the first aid? If you are dog bitten, what would be the first aid? If you are unconscious, what would be the first aid? So, but never I came across this word that there would be something about the mental health first aid.
Right.
So that's what I feel like there are some caveats or there are some pitfalls in our even in our the education system,
Right. Even
right?
you are talking about the medical
Even
care
in the
system
medical
itself.
education system. So I think the system of education is something that has to be seen in a good perspective, and if we can be a breeze in that level of education or the system of education by this radio talk, at least to let other people know about the signs and symptoms of the mental illness, I think we would serve our purpose.
Yes, that is it. So, this is how, sometimes this is mind-boggling, right? To hear from someone who is in the medical field for 20 years,
Right.
And who has specialized in a medical care,
That's
right?
true.
Has no idea about mental illness before coming to United States, or at least mental health first aid.
I'm really saying this as a very true that
So,
when
yes.
I first attended the mental health first aid
First aid training.
I felt like, okay, this is something new. I have never been learning this. I have never learned about something these words even exist in the medical dictionary. And it was very understanding things for me that even such things exist, and even those sort of medical training would lead me know something about the first aid the first aid of the mental illness. So having said that, we already told that any person can learn about the mental illness, right? But is there any time, or is there any best time to learn about the mental illness?
Wow, that's an interesting. A lot of people say, "Oh, the time hasn't come for me to learn about mental illness," right?
Right.
And they would say, "No, I am not yet ready to learn about mental illness. I don't have to learn about mental illness." Those sort of things keep going on and on, right? Is there a right time to learn about mental illness?
Right.
Hey, it is the right time to learn about mental illness. Anytime that you heard about mental illness, somebody talked to you about mental illness, or if you knew someone, if you know someone in your community, in your family, that is the right time to learn about mental illness. It's not about just brushing off. Oh, it happens to him, it happens to her, that's not going to happen to me. Now it is healthcare's responsibility, so I don't have to learn about mental illness. Please remove this sort of notion, and then right away start, doing research, or look for ways to learn about mental illness. So anytime is the right time.
Is the right time. Anytime is the right time
to learn about mental illness.
But
Yes.
the question is, again, when we say anytime is the right time, how can we learn it?
Great. So, Robbie, right? There are numerous ways we can learn about mental illness.
Right.
And in the beginning, we share, attending mental health first aid training. So there is always this mental health first aid training happening across the United States. Even if you are living outside the United States, these trainings are happening. You have to check online, but that could be complicated. Sometimes these trainings aren't happening. The simple way to learn mental illness is online resources. There are great online resources. But hey, folks, I wanted to give you some, FYI, there are not all websites have credible information.
Right.
So I want to give you some website that has really credible information. For example, NAMI.org, NAMI.org, which is a National Mental Health Institute. Okay. That is one way to go into www.nami.org, or SAMHSA, or the MayoClinic.org. If you wanted to look into mentalhealth.gov, right, simply www.mentalhealth.gov,
Right.
or mentalhealthfirstaid.org. and samhsa.gov, samhsa.gov. So these are fantastic resources to look into the facts of the mental illness.
Right.
So don't go into any goofy websites. There are many goofy websites they'll talk about. We wanted to share you credible information.
Right.
Meaning that has facts and figures on it. This the information will not mislead you. So you have to be aware on these DNAs. Also, there are community organizations, community mental health organizations that will provide you mental health information. Community leaders will also be able to provide mental information about mental illness, right? And also there are great books. So it depends, but the first basic thing is you start from a website. Everybody has an access to website. Most of the,
Right,
I don't want to
right.
say everybody, but those who are listening to us at least has access to website.
Right.
You start from there.
Right.
And I give a simple name, NAMI.org.
Yeah, and I think one good aspects of these sites are that whatever has been described over there, it is described in a very simple terms so
Yes.
that everybody could understand. However, if you go to any scientific journals or scientific magazines, maybe you will encounter with some big heavy words which might be a little bit difficult to understand. So the best thing about this one is try to surf the net, try to get more and the more information about the sign and symptoms
signs and symptoms.
of mental illness. There are several types of mental illness, and each of them have their own characteristics, sign and symptoms. A person who has a depth knowledge about it might be able to get it accurate. However, for a general population, it is difficult to know sign and symptoms of all of these disease, right? But there might be some of the common sign and symptoms of mental illness. So you, as a certified mental health first aid trainer, or I could, will you be able to let our listeners and viewers know what could be those important observations that any person can see in a mentally ill person and can be recognized as a common sign and symptoms?
Yes, it does. Also it's part of my training, it's part of my education. And currently I am, pursuing my higher education on mental health therapy and counseling. But one does not have to go into that depth to understand mental illness, right? The basic of the mental illness. If you know someone, if it's your family friend, your loved one who has excessive, who is, is worried about so many things, simply, okay?
Right.
You talk to that person and it seems that person is worried about so many things. Excessively sad or low, right? If you find a person excessively sad for no reason or feeling very low or has no mood to do things, you begin to understand. Don't label it, but that may be one of the reasons. Like, the other thing to identify is confused in thinking or having difficulty concentration. If you are having trouble concentrating on something, you may have that issue. So don't look into someone. Always you can find in yourself as well. Extreme mood changes, like these things happen. Well, women do go through mood changes during the during the periods, but if you have mood changes and extremely those are affecting you, it could be one of these signs. A prolonged and strong feeling of irritation and anger. These are the signs, right? Avoiding friends and families. If someone is in, started living in isolation, stop contacting friends and families, if that is a new behavior. So whatever signs and symptoms I'm sharing with you, if that is a new behavior, we have to be very mindful, right? If someone like being alone, if someone is a lonely person, if that is his nature, if that is her nature, that's a different thing. But all of a sudden, when you begin to see these signs and symptoms, right, avoiding friends or getting irritated or being excessively angry or worried or sad, or started sharing about some sadness and those kind of things, right? And these are the starting signs and symptoms. However, there are other signs and symptoms when person is really ill. We don't want to go into that, but we just wanted to share with you the beginning, the basic, If someone is excessively worried, if someone is really sad or low, if someone has a hard time concentrating, falling in sleep, right? Very difficulty getting out of the bed. If you have a body aches and pains, if you are irritated, if you started avoiding friends, if you are started living in isolation, these are the beginning sign that could happen to you, that could happen to someone that you know. Now, if you begin to observe this sign, then you may have to start thinking about, hey, maybe my friend or my someone has mental health issues.
So that means a sudden change in the
Sudden change in the
behaviors
yes.
could be a suspicious sign that somebody might be suffering from the mental illness, right?
Yeah.
But mental illness can happen to anyone. That's what we already discussed, and we already know about that. Mental health illness can happen to anyone. And in the last episode, we discussed about the myth that children cannot have mental illness. But the truth is that children can suffer from mental illness. And the more common mental disorders in children are usually the attention deficit or the hyperactivity disorders, anxiety, and behavior disorders. There has been a couple of reports based on the mental illness in children. And according to CDC, 9.4% of the children aged between 2 to 17 years, that is approximately 6.1 million, is diagnosed with attention deficit or the hyperactivity disorders. Approximately 4.5 million children have behavior problem, and 4.4 million children have anxiety. 1.9 million children have depression in US. I know it is difficult to remember signs and symptoms for all of these disease, but since children are learning to talk or bring emotions, some of them might not be able to fully show their behaviors, because we told that in adults usually the certain change in the behaviors could be a suspicious of mental illness. However, in children, if they are not able to show those behaviors, is it difficult to understand the sign and symptoms of mental illness in young children?
Yes, that is true. So what I said in the beginning applies to adult. So we have to be mindful. Usually, understanding children's mental health signs and symptoms is difficult because they are growing very rapidly, and there are behavioral change all the time. And also, children are trying to adapt, right? So they try different behavior at different period of the time. So they are trying to adapt with the adult life. They are trying to adapt with the parents, and also depends on the environment they are in. So what type of environment children are growing up, they have to adapt into that environment. So sometimes what may seem as a behavioral issue may not be a behavioral issue, and sometimes we may ignore a warning sign about the behavioral issue. But you rightly point out the anxiety disorder, attention deficiency disorder, right?
Right.
Autism, and then eating disorder. These are very common. Mood disorder, schizophrenia. These are also common with the children. But however, what we say today in this show is, if you feel like your child or someone that you know, a young child is suffering, if you know, right, you need to go talk to a doctor, or you need to go talk to care providers, because it is their responsibility to determine.
Right.
And as you point out rightfully, that it is quite difficult to comprehend the behavioral issue and in the children, and especially to identify mental health problem would be a difficult thing. But always taking children to hospital, timely checkup, and then talking to your healthcare providers about signs and symptoms, behavioral issue is crucial.
I think the timely checkup would also help out in helping in knowing about the mental issues in the children's, right?
Yes. And in the U.S., let's say from the U.S. context, or in the developed countries, children they go to their care providers once in 6 months, once a year, right? So you have to take your children to the care providers, and at that time you should be open about the behavioral change. Or if you observe some behavior that were unique, please do talk to your care providers, because they are the one who would be able to make that diagnosis, right?
We now know that if you start seeing a sudden change in the behavior in your family members, such as extreme mood changes or prolonged irritating behavior, avoiding friends or social activities, sudden changes in sleeping habits, eating habits, or alcohol or drug consumption, there is a strong sign of mental illness in adolescents. Similarly, if you observe in children changes in school performance or the excessive worry or anxiety, frequent nightmares, frequent aggression, or frequent temper tantrums, instead of scolding them or raising your tone, think that your children might be having mental issues. In such case, don't be afraid and reach out to your health insurance, right? Primary care doctors, right?
Healthcare providers.
Yeah, healthcare providers or state country mental health authority for more resources. Remember, if treatment is given in time, mental illness is a curable disease. With that said, we would like to take a small musical break. After the break, we'll try to address the anxiety and depression and how to recognize the signs and symptoms of them. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This is Ravi and Sudarshan from
Stay
Radio
tuned in.
Jagran, the voice. Welcome back after this short musical break. You are listening to fifth episode of Radio Jagran, Voice of New Americans, in which we are addressing the sign and symptoms of mental illness. Before the break, we briefly discussed on common sign and mental illness in adults and children. Depression and anxiety are the common illness worldwide. According to the World Health Organization, more than 264 million people of all ages suffer from depression. An estimated 275 million people suffer from anxiety disorders. They are usually frequently co-occur and have similar signs and symptoms. Sudarshan Dai, before addressing the sign and symptoms of these two mental illness, what is the subtle difference between these two diseases, or I can say what are the similarities between these two diseases? Because usually I have seen people talking about depression and anxiety as a synonym of each other type. So what is the subtle difference between these two diseases?
So what we have to understand is both anxiety and depression are a form of mood disorder. right? So they fall into one category, which is a mood disorder. And in simple, as we are saying, without making this complex, in the mental health training, what we call this as a comorbidity, which means these two symptoms occur together. But let's not go into that. Let's make it very simple. In our everyday language, if I want to make someone understand what anxiety and what depression is, what anxiety and what depression is, I would very simply say that if you are excessively worrying about future, that is anxiety. Very simply, okay?
Right.
And then if you are excessively worried about your past, that's a depression. Kind of. I want to relate what I mean by that, right? If you are anxious about what is going to happen tomorrow, if you're anxious about what is going to happen to you all the time, if there is too much of anxiousness, that is what the anxiety is, right? You are anticipating something to happen,
Right.
and that anticipation is so strong that it skewed your ability to think properly. So it distorts the reality to some extent. So that is anxiety. But depression is when someone goes back to his past.
Oh, okay.
Right? I
Okay.
am worried about this thing happened, break up, or relationship broke up, or business failure, or whatever that could be. Maybe, blaming oneself for a fail. If you failed in something and you started blaming yourself. So when someone goes too much into the past, that could be the sign of depression. However, I want to really make clear, these two symptoms appear together.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Sometimes you may have anxiety and sometimes you may have depression. It does not mean that if person A has depression, he or she will not have anxiety. It could happen. But sometimes, and oftentimes we have seen that some people only have anxiety issues and they don't have depression. And on the other hand, some people only have depression but not anxiety. So let me read few things here. So anxiety is an excessive worry, okay? Restlessness, being easily fatigued, means getting tired. Trouble, if you have trouble concentrating, irritability, sleep disturbances, muscle tensions. People often complain about somatic pain, bodily pain, right? And those kind of conditions often is seen in anxiety disorder. However, in the depression, it is also a mood disorder, but depression is primarily lack of interest in enjoyable activities. If there is an enjoyable activities, if you used to enjoy it yesterday, you were fond of playing, let's say, card or playing volleyball. Now you don't feel pleasurable anymore. You stop going there. Increase or decrease in appetite. Right, there is a sudden change in there's a change in your weight.
Right.
Lack of energy, feeling of excessive guilt.
Okay.
That I brought, right? Feeling of excessive guilt and worthlessness. Oh, I am, not worth living. I am not a worthy person. Those kind of things. These are depression-related behavior. But we can go further into it. But I think this is a basic. We wanted to give only basic information, right?
That's true.
So
That's
just to give you a clue, if somebody is excessively worried about tomorrow, thinking too much
Right.
of anticipation, think that is a sign of anxiety. And if somebody is thinking too much about the past, that's a depression. But one thing that I wanted to make clear is anxiety. Anxiety is natural. Okay,
Right.
Anxiety helps you survive in a very difficult situation. Think about if you see a lion or any other wild animals. What happens is the excessive amount of anxiety that will create in your body will actually let you do two actions. That's called a flight or fight.
Yeah.
Right? It's such a dangerous situation. You have to take either of those situations.
Right.
That is being in anxiety.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
It is naturally in our system, but what happens is when it does not calm down, when it does not go away,
Right.
the situation of the anxiousness did not disappear. It is the issue. That's the problem.
So you said that the depression and anxiety usually coexist together. I have seen people even use the term called mood disorder.
Mood disorder,
So
yes.
is mood disorder same as depression?
So depression and anxiety both are type of mood disorder.
Okay.
Okay.
So you can list them as a types of disorders, like
Right.
mood disorders.
Right. Majorly, there are different types of mood disorder, right? So bipolar disorder or postpartum depression, seasonal depression. These are major mood disorder, right? This is because this happened because of the mood fluctuation. However, among them, the top two are anxiety and depression. That's why we insist a lot of time into talking about anxiety and depression.
There are cases in which some people do not even realize that they have depression, or sometimes they tend to hide it from others. Is it possible to understand by his or her behavior that he or she is suffering from some sort of depression? You got that point initially. What could be a little bit of in sign and symptoms of depressions, but still, we wanted to know, or all our viewers, we wanted to let all our viewers know that whether we have a good sign and symptoms by just looking at it, or by the behavioral changes. Can we recognize the sign and symptoms of depression?
Okay, so from my general understanding, mental health 101 as a first aider, what I would say is, one person won't be able, just ordinary person won't be able to know the sign and symptoms of the depression at one meeting, or at a glance, or at a 5 minutes observation. That is not possible.
Right.
So, however, if you are living with someone, if you have if you have sheer time with somebody for an extended period of time, like extended length of time, and you know that person for a long time, you would be able to know the change in the behavior. However, only qualified psychiatric or doctors would be able to know the signs and symptoms pretty quickly. However, as I said, the basic signs and symptoms, what we are trying to say today is you should apply this information only to someone you know very well. You have been living with that person, or you work with that person, you knew that person in the past, and then you saw those changes. Only in that case you will be able to understand the signs and symptoms to some extent pretty quickly. However, let's go into a little bit into the depth, right? What you have to do is, observation is a great thing. You have to start from observation, right?
Right.
The other thing is, you may start talking to that person. Having a conversation is crucial, right? So in the conversation, if the person is open about talking about his or her feeling, and if they are sharing about the helplessness, hopelessness, loss of interest in a daily life, or loss of appetite, or sudden change in the appetite, and change in the sleep pattern, or they are having hard times falling asleep, anger and irritation, loss of energy, those kind of, if they bring about this conversation, I am feeling really tired these days, I don't know the reason, I don't like to eat, if he or she is a co-worker and says that, I don't want to take my lunch, I'm not hungry yet, I haven't ate anything, those sort of thing. And if they are, if you see those behavioral change, then of course, then you will have some idea that, hey, my friend or my coworker or my colleague may be having some mental health issue. So what we wanted to say is, having a mental health issue is something common. Okay, let's not see that as, how mental health. No, it could happen to anyone,
that's
right?
True. That's we have been advocating for so long.
We have been talking
right?
about it.
That's true.
1 out of 5 person will suffer from mental illness in their lifetime.
That's true.
So anytime this can happen, so we have to see it normally.
Right.
Hey, this may be a sign and symptom.
Yeah. Let's talk about anxiety a little bit. I believe anxiety is our body's natural response to stress, right? You already told about it. When there is a stress, for example, say a first day of school, or when you have meeting to attend, or you are late, or when you have to give speech in front of larger audience, our nervous system directs our adrenal gland to release certain type of hormones like adrenaline or noradrenaline hormones. And the major action of these hormones are, you have a rapid heartbeat, or you have rapid breathing, you have pale skin and dilated pupils, you tremble, or even you urinate. Therefore, anxiety can happen to anyone, but it usually subsides in around 30 minutes. But if your anxiousness is persistent or lasting for a long time, it might be associated with mental disorders. So, are there any type of anxiety, or what are the usually signs and symptoms of these anxiety disorders?
Great. So you already gave some signs and symptoms of anxiety disorder, right?
Right.
Anxiety happens pretty quickly sometimes if you're not familiar with the situation.
Right.
As you said, if you have to give a speech in front of your classmates, or if you have to give a speech in a ceremony or in a workplace, right?
Right.
If you have to present something to your boss, you get anxious. Those are normal. That will go away after some times.
Right.
But if those symptoms persisted over a long time,
Right.
then that is an anxiety disorder. But you ask me, what are the types of anxiety disorder, right?
Right.
There are commonly the commonly tested anxiety disorder are called the generalized anxiety disorder, what we call the GAD, right? This is in a hospital. If you go, they will ask 7 questions, and it's called the GAD-7, GAD-7. They will ask you 7 questions to determine if you have a generalized anxiety disorder.
Okay.
Every time when you go to hospital, oftentimes the nurses will ask you a couple of questions, and if they doubt that you have somebody is having some mental health symptoms, they will definitely do that test, and it's pretty quick. It takes less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
And the other form of anxiety disorder are the obsessive compulsive disorder.
Okay.
Right?
Uh-huh.
It's also called OCD. Often kids have that problem. Adults do have that problem. So simply OCD is if you are repeating something over and over and over again. Just to give you a simple example, when somebody gets too worried about, let's say, jump, right? They go wash their hands many times a day, many times, almost 100, 200 times a day. That is OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. Maybe some people chew their nail or bite their nail and things like that. Those are OCD. But all the time, this is not a serious issue, but sometimes it becomes, if it is too much, if it is impacting normal life, then we should start thinking about it.
Right.
From the treatment point of view, panic disorder is also an anxiety disorder. PTSD, right? We talked about PTSD in the beginning, right?
Right.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, right? We learned that the people who came from war or conflict area had PTSD, but now scientists have uncovered there are other ways that you could be suffering from anxiety, PTSD. So that's also one of the form of anxiety. And last not the least is the social phobia or social anxiety, as we discussed, right? If you have to go give a speech, you'll get super anxious. But if you practice for a while, it goes away. But for some people, even if they practice persistently, it does not go away, which is a social phobia. Now, I don't want to go into the details of social phobia and all those things, but what we have to know is that fear, that excessive fear, is one of the signs of anxiety. However, we have to keep this in mind that if it goes away after some time, that is normal and natural.
Okay. The overall take-home message is for today's episodes is that if you see sudden changes in the behaviors of your family members, friends, or colleagues, then you could sense that he might be having or she might be having a mental illness. I have seen in our community that people take mental illness in a negative way. Disease like diabetes, gastric problems, or hypertension are taken in an easy way. People believe that if you take medicine, these disease would be cured, or at least these disease would be maintained. However, mental disease is still taken as a stigma in our society. Therefore, a patient will not disclose that he has mental illness, or even the family members are hesitant to openly talk in public that one of the family members is suffering from mental illness. This can definitely lead to discrimination. Again, we are focusing the truth of the mental illness, that it is disease just like diabetes or hypertension. It is curable, and please talk about it, right? So have you seen such type of stigma associated with the mental illness in our community?
Yes. So much. One of the biggest barrier that we have seen that we are facing today is stigma related to mental illness, right? Stigma and taboos related to mental illness.
Right.
And for a long time, people who had mental health issues, people were avoiding them. They don't go talk to them, right?
Right.
He's a crazy person. She's a crazy person. Just
Right.
avoid talking to that person. That person may be needing someone to talk to in the first place. But we avoid. Those are taboos, right?
Right.
And there are many ways that we have seen mental health as a stigma, not talking to them,
That's
thinking
true.
they are crazy or they are lunatic, and they could do some crazy thing. Don't associate yourself with. They could do some crime. They have something going on inside their mind. They could erupt anytime. They are unpredictable. They are like volcanoes and so on and so on.
Right.
These are a stigma. These are a stigma.
Right.
And last time we share, right? Someone struggling with mental health could be functioning very normally.
That's true.
Just they need attention sometimes, but treatment can help them. But stigma, especially stigma, has made this effort very difficult in our community. Across the communities, it's not
Right.
just New American or Bhutanese Nepali community, across the communities. So we really, but one thing that I wanted to add here is stigma is very culturally grounded. Okay,
That's
so
true.
when we talk about stigma, it varies from culture to culture. So in a Nepali culture, stigma could be something different than in the Western culture, right? So I don't want to generalize the stigma.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It is a very culturally grounded. What I wanted to say today is we should know about stigma. As in the beginning we said, until and unless we overcome stigma,
Right.
right? We
Right.
won't be able to help someone who is having mental health issue.
Right.
But we have to be open-minded. We should be open to learning. We should take part in the conversation.
Right.
And in that way, we can actually tackle stigma.
Right. I think the self-learning is also one thing that you can always do to learn about the mental issues or the mental illness, or even to understand about the first aid, or even to understand about the sign and symptoms of mental illness, and so that it won't be stigma in the future.
Right.
Because it has been stigma for so long in our communities about the mental illness, but we do not want it to be a stigma in future.
Forever, right?
Right?
Yeah.
And for that, I think the self-learning is something. And the other thing that
There- Please.
and the other thing that I could feel is that try to have a conversation among your family members.
Yes.
Try to speak about it. Try to talk about it with your friends, with your family members. If you are still hesitant to talk to your family members, if you are still do not wanting to talk with your friends, then talk to us. At least you could message to us, or howsoever you can reach to us, but at least talk to someone.
Yes, talk to someone. Okay. That is something that we can do in everyday life, right?
Right,
That is
right.
something you can do. But there are some other ways how we can tackle stigma,
Right,
right?
that's true.
Generally practice more academic kind of approach is get treatment, first of all.
Right.
If you are a victim of, as you said, if you are a victim of mental illness, if you became victim because of mental illness, is what I was trying to say. First thing, get treatment.
Right.
Second thing, don't let stigma create self-doubt and shame.
That's true.
Okay?
That's true.
Don't let stigma create self-doubt. We begin to doubt ourselves. And same,
yeah.
do not isolate yourself. These are way to overcome stigma. Don't equate yourself with mental illness. Oftentimes, people say, people don't say themselves, but oftentimes we hear people saying to others like, hey, he's a bipolar, right? Or he's a depressed guy. No, please. This is very wrong wording. Don't equate yourself with the illness, meaning someone is suffering from bipolar disease. For example, we don't say, oh, person X is a cancer, right? We say someone is suffering from cancer,
Right.
right?
Right.
Has a cancer issues or has a challenges with health challenge with the cancer or something like
right,
that.
right.
We say that, but
Right.
with mental health, hey, very easily say he's a bipolar. No, he's not a bipolar. If I had a bipolar issue, I am not a bipolar. I am suffering from
a bipolar disease.
I have schizophrenia, right? Instead of saying, so And also join groups. The other effective strategy, if you are someone who has a mental health issue, the effective strategy is to join support groups. There are mental health support groups, just like AAA, AAA, like the Alcohol Anonymous group.
Right.
Just like that, there are groups that supports mental health clients, or sorry, mental health, if you mental health community, right? And that can really help you overcome. Personally in my lifetime, I had suffered from mental illness, mental health challenges. I had anxiety disorder for a long time.
Right.
So it was not serious to the point that I had to go see a doctor, but I knew that I was struggling with anxiety disorder since my childhood, and I never knew about it. My parents, my siblings never knew about it, and I struggled for a long time. But eventually, I researched about it. I joined groups and I talk about it, and then I begin to explore, and to a great extent, I overcome. So there are clear examples. There are many people you'll find that by by being open towards it, they overcome mental health challenges, and also talking about the issues in school. And also speaking out against stigma. So if you are someone, right, I am someone who suffered from mental health problem in the past. Now what I am doing right now is I am speaking out about mental illness.
Right.
And also I'm speaking against stigma, right? Considering expressing your opinion at an event, in a letter to an editorial, or in the internet.
Right.
These are the ways you can do. Or also you can help instill courage in others who are facing similar challenges in education and in public places, right? So you can encourage someone. You can be an advocate. You can be a person, someone who would be open to talking about mental health and against those stigma. In that manner, we can tackle and challenge the mental health stigma.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to tackle with the mental issues. If you are having any problems, and if you were treated, and if you were cured, the best thing is to spread this message to all of the other people that this is just a disease and it can be curable. Try to make a story, try to create a story what happened in your lifetime, and try to post it in a Facebook or in a public forum, so that other people can also understand that mental illness is not a stigma anymore. So
mental health illness should not be stigma anymore.
Yes. Along with that, we have seen that these mental illness is also a taboo. Has also been considered as a taboo in our
topic.
Society,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And how can we address that? We'll just be in a very short, because stigma and taboo are somehow related, similar. And the best thing is to study about it. But how can we a little bit talk about the taboos?
Okay, stigma is something that you label.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's true.
You said, oh, he has a mental health, he's a crack or something like that. People make stigmatize, right? You label something.
Right.
Taboo is something that you don't talk. You put a carton before you and say, I don't see it. It's not happening. That's a taboo. So there are taboos in our community. We are not talking about it. We are prohibiting knowingly. Although it is a bad thing, but we are prohibiting. Those kind of things are taboos. So as we discussed today here, just like we tackle with the stigma, we also have to tackle with taboos too. Now, let me give you an example of taboos in our culture, in the Nepali culture, but also across many cultures, right? For example, the sex before marriage, right? This is a taboo, right? Women going through the menstrual period, right? They were isolated in the home. They were tabooed from doing that. Especially left-handed people were criticized, and they were forced to eat food by right hand. My brother is a left-handed, and he eats food with right hand, and then for the rest of the whatever he had to do, he uses his left hand because it was taboo. He wasn't allowed to eat food with his left hand, but it was natural. His left was his right. So those kind of things are taboo. So we have to understand mental health from the taboo context. Meaning, if somebody don't want to talk in your family, no, this is not the topic that we should talk about. That person is creating a taboo. Then you have to challenge. If you listen to us, if you trust us, and if you think that is something that you can, we can get rid of. If you are a warrior, okay, get out and start talking about it. Get out and start talking about it.
So one of the things to emphasize on today's topic, today's episode, is mental health illness is not a taboo. It's
It
not
is not
a
a-
stigma.
We
So-
should not stigmatize.
and
It is not a taboo.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's the properly
Yeah,
said.
that. Sorry.
We
but
should
yeah,
not stigmatize,
stigmatize.
and it's not a taboo.
It is not a taboo.
So with that said, we already have 7 p.m. in our studio.
Oh, 1 minute,
In 1
more
minute
or less.
left.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think we can quickly say what are we discussing next in our upcoming episodes. So what is the plan for the next upcoming episode?
So in the upcoming, so that
Mm-hmm.
is going to be our 6th episode. We will try to wrap up mental health challenges.
Mm-hmm.
If need be, then we'll talk about it in the future. But we'll overall we'll try to see mental health, especially
Mm-hmm.
from the context of our community. And one thing that last time we share with our audience and viewers is that we'll talk about suicide and how to prevent suicide. So next topic is going to be on suicide. That would be our last topic on this series about mental illness.
Right.
So stay tuned in. We will share about how to be aware of this happening in our community, in our family, and how we can prevent that. And we'll also talk about great resources to prevent suicide in our community.
At the end, mental illness is a curable disease. It is a human behavior to be anxious about problems, to get depressed with sad moments. But remember, there is always a solution for a problem. The best way to tackle a problem is to face it. It might seem difficult, but once you try, you will feel better. Feel positive for what you have it in hand rather than what you never achieved. Remember, there are others who are struggling hard to get something which you have already achieved. If you feel negative to life, go to gym, do yoga, stay busy. Best of all, speak to someone about how you feel. Speak to us. Mental illness is not a taboo. Mental illness should not be stigmatized. This is Ravi and Sudarshan signing off with a promise to be back again on next Sunday right at 6 p.m. We'll be continuing with the topic of mental illness, how to take care of someone with mental health challenges, and why talking about mental health is important. Till then, do good, be good. This is
Stay tuned in and enjoy your life.
Yeah.
This is very important. We will be talking and learning about social issues and social challenges. We will be on Apex One Radio for quite a long time to come. So please stay tuned. Also, we want your feedback. Please give us your feedback. We are just learning. We are new, but our intents and our motives are good. We wanted to help, support community. We want to bring awareness, but as I said, and as Ravi said, oftentimes, we are not experts in all field. We do our best. Of course, mental health is one of the fields that I'm passionate about, I'm learning about, and I have some, qualification to say. But we really want your feedback. And in the coming shows, we'll start inviting our guests as well. So you could be one of them.
Right.
Stay tuned in. Join us.
This is Apex One Radio, and you're listening to Radio Jagaran, the voice
Of New American.
Americans.